There are 5 key lessons that I took away from the Tennessee bow opener, and I want to share them with you to help in your hunting success. And you're going to want to stick around for the last one because I think it will surprise you. Welcome to the EndurHunt podcast. Join me as I share my experiences as an emergent hunter, offer advice on how to overcome challenges and pursue your passion for hunting. If this is your first time listening to the podcast, thank you. I am your host, Andrew Lukosevic. I started hunting in 2018 after I got out of the Marine Corps. My very first hunt was in Montana, southwest Montana, on an elk mule deer combination license. And although I did not fill any tags on that hunt, I caught the hunting bug and I have been hunting ever since. I have now hunted in 7 states: Montana, New Jersey, Utah, Wyoming, Arizona, Texas, Tennessee. I think I got all of them on the first try. That's never happened before. And I've hunted everything from whitetail deer. You can see my very first whitetail over here that I got in New Jersey. Pronghorn, axis, if you're watching on YouTube, that's the axis ruck I got from Texas. And I created this brand to help people like me. I didn't grow up in a hunting family. The first time I touched a firearm was when I was in basic training in the military. And I know how difficult it can be to get started, to make mistakes. And I want to share my mistakes so that hopefully you don't have to make them yourself and that you have a resource to get out into the woods and go and pursue this amazing thing that I love in hunting. The Tennessee bow opener had a lot of ups and downs for me. My wife and I just moved here from Texas back in February, and the house my wife and I bought needed a lot of updating. I don't think it has been updated since the 90s, probably. There were lots of things that needed to get fixed, replaced, and generally we've been doing all of the work that we can ourselves to try and save some money. It has been an extremely time consuming. I talked about this in a previous podcast, Tennessee in Life. I'll link it in the cards. But it kind of took over our lives. We weren't hunting, we weren't hiking, we weren't seeing friends, we weren't doing anything except working on the house. Nights and weekends were all basically spent working on this house. Now it's been worth it, but we needed a break. And about 6 weeks ago, we just stopped working on the house. There are certain things that need to get finished still and projects that we're going to start next year. But we both decided that we needed to take a step back from working on the house. I wanted to start getting ready for hunting season. My wife wanted to start working out and exercising and working on hobbies and seeing friends. And that sort of brings us to this. You might be asking, how does this relate to the Tennessee bow opener? And this is the primary thing that I want to say, and the reason why that background I think is important. I was very delayed with my scouting. I was very delayed with my prep and shooting for the season. And normally I'd like to be more prepared, but there was no way I was not going to go out for the opener. So even though I did not necessarily have the tree I wanted to hunt picked out, I did get in plenty of scouting. So let's get into these 5 lessons, starting with lesson number 1. Scouting is essential. E-scouting is incredibly helpful. Don't get me wrong. I e-scout the crap out of everything, just like I'm sure most of you do. But you have to put boots on the ground and validate that the area you think holds deer, the place that looks good on the map, actually holds deer. There have been plenty of times in the past where I have looked at a place on a map, including this season, where I looked at a place and I'm like, this is the spot. Deer are going to flow through this. I'm so excited to go check it out. It's going to be the perfect spot, only to get there and realize that the sign isn't as good as you think it's going to be. Now, as part of my prep, I e-scouted basically every piece of public within an hour of where I live. In Texas, that was literally one place. Actually, technically it wasn't, because I think it was over an hour drive away. In Tennessee, I fortunately have multiple places that I can e-scout. There's one area in particular I was very excited about. There are 2 reasons why. One, it was just a big forest. There's lots of area, big chunks of public that you can go, not separate small chunks that I would have to go through and move. And the second thing is, it doesn't show up on the Tennessee website. You have to go through different, I'm not going to say where, you have to go through different websites to figure out how to hunt this place. It requires another permit. To me, that meant that there's probably not going to be as much pressure. Not only did this place have a great variety of terrain, I found different levels of elevation, diversity in foliage, some openings, not big fields, but some openings that would create some edge habitat, water, and essentially everything that a deer needs to survive. Plus, there are plenty of areas that you could get away from the roads. You could walk a few miles away from a road and get into some sanctuary type habitat. Needless to say, I was very excited, and this was the first place that I went scouting. My first scouting trip, I went out one morning, I hiked 6 miles. I checked waypoints, went into some saddles, looked at areas that I thought were going to be deer funnels. I even put out 2 trail cameras. I let those sit for 2 weeks before checking them while I scouted other areas. Came back and nothing. Not a single picture. Not a single picture in a saddle that had good tracks in it, that I thought had good tracks in it, that clearly must be old. There's acorns everywhere. The sign all must have just been older than I thought it was when I was scouting myself. Over the course of 3 trips and probably 10 miles or so, I saw 2 deer, 2 does that I bumped walking back to the trailhead while walking on the trail. Now, I still have 1 camera out there, but this is not where I hunted. Getting a little ahead of myself, the area I did hunt started with just 1 waypoint on Onyx, just 1. I had probably a dozen on this place. I'm sort of mentoring a guy. So my wife made a really good friend here, and her husband is into guns and wanted to start hunting. And I offered to help him out. So I've been showing him how to e-scout, talking to him about that, bringing him out with me on scouting trips, and we're going to hunt together as well. Now, I marked 1 waypoint on this 1 spot. It's a piece of public that looks kind of difficult to get to because there's not a great way to park and access it, but it's perfectly in the middle of 2 of us. It's literally like a 20-minute drive for me and a 20-minute drive for him. We could meet there after work or on a weekend. It wouldn't be as big of a deal. It has great field openings with some good edge. We've got little lines of timber running all over the place, and then bigger, dense areas of trees that could be used for bedding, great water access. It looked like a pretty good spot. It's just kind of hard to get into and out of. There's only 1 way in and out. You can only get in 1 way. So you have to be careful with your approach. But I thought because of that, and it's not the biggest piece, that maybe, just maybe, it would be overlooked. This was the last place that we went scouting. Literally the last place of probably half a dozen different spots that we went in. And I'm not talking trips because we scouted half a dozen spots, but we made multiple trips to some places, like the first place. We went in one hot day, and I mean hot. It was mid-90s when we went. And on that day, when it was hot, we saw 10 turkeys and I think 14, maybe 16 deer. Now they were all does, but it was great to spot a good amount of animals feeding comfortably in the open. And one of the big things that helped is those fields are all filled with soybeans. And clearly the deer are going out and feeding on them. And on top of that, if you go into the trees, into the wood line, there were acorns all over the place. There's a good acorn crop right now. So the deer have options in terms of what they can feed on. Boots on the ground scouting was a huge factor in where I hunted opening day. If I just picked a spot on the map and went in based on how that looked, I am very skeptical whether or not I would have seen any deer. But to finalize my pick, now I think I knew where I was going to go, but I wanted to finalize my pick. So let's move on to lesson number 2. Cameras are for inventory only. When I first started hunting, I put way too much pressure on trail cameras. I mean, way too much pressure on trail cameras. Rather than e-scouting and putting boots on the ground to figure out where I want to be, where the deer are actually going, I would try and find places that looked like a spot I could hunt. And then I would get in that tree and look around and be like, all right, what's within 20 to 30 yards of here? Do I think a deer is going to be in one of those spots? Let me put a camera there. And I would just throw cameras everywhere that I was thinking I'd want to shoot a deer, not trying to find where the deer are already going to be. I viewed trail cameras as a tool to validate the spot I wanted to hunt. And this is not the most ideal protocol in my opinion. I was essentially outsourcing my hunt planning to cameras that I put in place that may not be in the right position at all. especially because back then I didn't know what I'm doing, and I'm probably not that much better now. If you've followed along for the journey of this podcast, my expertise is not necessarily whitetail hunting. It is going on Western hunts and being able to find success and figure out how to do Western hunting. That has been sort of my bread and butter and what I have spent a lot of time into. Don't get me wrong. I love whitetail hunting, and I'm basically only whitetail hunting this year. But it is not, I'm no Mark Kenyon. I'm not wired to hunt, and I'm not all in on the whitetails. I love hunting everything, and I try to diversify my hunting experience. Going back to this season's prep, I might not be very good at putting trail cameras. I tried to put them in places that looked like they would be a natural deer funnels. So, for example, I put one camera on a saddle where I saw fresh acorns and what looked like an actively used trail. Nothing for 2 weeks. I've got 4 cameras out and only one cell camera. I've relocated all the other ones, actually including the cellular camera, since the season kicked off. And I've been getting, maybe 2 or 3 pictures a week on the cell camera. But I know there are more deer than that, and I didn't probably put it in the right place. I just haven't bothered to go in there and move it. So there is a strong chance that I am just not very good at using trail cameras or implementing trail cameras. But the longer I've been hunting, the more I've been hunting whitetails, the less and less I kind of care about trail cameras. And again, that might be because I'm not very good at using them. But I place more emphasis on using cameras for inventory. It is nice to get pictures and all, but I no longer use them as a tool to determine where and when I should hunt exactly, but more to see what kind of deer are going through this area, when are they going through this area, so that I can understand their patterns and habits. One thing that is also probably worth mentioning, considering I've been bad-mouthing my trail camera skills, you can't bait on public land in Tennessee. I don't know that you can bait on private either, but Academy and all the other stores sell corn, so I'm assuming you can. I'm also not using salt licks or anything like that. For me, I would rather just put a trail camera where I think deer are already going to go. So I mentioned I have 4 cameras. They're all out there. The cell camera is giving me the best activity. Like I said, it's giving me 2 to 3 pictures per week, usually at night, of some does moving. I strongly considered hunting in that spot before I did boots on the ground scouting, but based on the actual scouting I have done, the highest concentration of deer and sign was in the other spot that I scouted on the last day when it was in the 90s. So how am I using my trail cameras then? I still have them out, and I'm using them essentially at areas that I think might hold deer. That first place that I was very excited about in lesson 1, I have 2 cameras out there in different spots that are basically on heavily used trails and what I think will be a late season sanctuary. I'm just going to leave those out for the entire season pretty much. I'm not going to touch them. I will be very excited to see what is on those cameras at the end of the season. But for now, I'm not hunting in those areas. So I ended up choosing my opening day spot despite not having a single cell camera or trail camera in there, because I had basically no success on the other trail cameras. I wasn't getting consistent sign anywhere. The sign I was seeing in other places was old. And that last area was the one that I saw in person had the most deer and looked like it had places that I could actually hunt. Something else I think is worth mentioning, the area that I am hunting in, you can take $2 per year and 3 does a day for basically the entirety of the season. And although my other trail cameras only have does on them, basically, I am not opposed to shooting does. I haven't been hard hunting whitetails in a while, and I need to just get some success under my belt so that I can get used to it again and figure it out, because it's been a while. So based on everything I saw from the trail cameras, the e-scouting, and the boots on the ground scouting, I picked that final spot that I scouted where I saw the 10 turkeys and like 14 or 16 deer, and I had one of the best opening day weekends ever as a result. So now that I knew the spot I wanted to hunt, it's time to hunt, which brings us to lesson number 3, play the wind. The area I picked had several fields that were broken up by junipers, pines, and some other trees. There were some lines of thin timber that were maybe 10 feet, 15 feet wide, but then you also had areas of dense timber where you could probably go for miles and there's obvious bedding cover in there. Those fields filled with soybeans were a great food source and are spread out. Even though there's only one major way in and out of the unit, that route in is pretty centrally located. So you could essentially find a spot to play any single wind that you want. Now, there was one field in particular that I wanted to hunt. When I went scouting with my friend, basically every field had deer or something in it. The first field we looked at had turkeys. The second field was actually completely empty. But then every field after that had 9, 2, 3 deer. I really wanted to hunt the one with the 9 deer because, I mean, why wouldn't you? It's got the highest concentration of animals. Hopefully that means that you'll get an opportunity. The fields that I want to hunt is essentially a big rectangle running north to south with 2 pockets of trees pretty much right in the middle of it. The northeast corner juts out a little bit. So instead of being a perfect rectangle, right before it gets to the end, it just kind of cuts out and makes a little edge. So the north side is a thin strip of timber, and then on the east and the west are more big, dense timber that I thought would make good bedding. For opening weekend, the wind was coming from south-southeast, so it would be going across the entire field to that northern line of trees. My thought was, leading up to the hunt, that because there's that little jut out and the wind is going to go across the field and head right to that, if I were a big buck, I would want to feed out from that jut into the edge of the soybeans so that I could both see the entire field and get all of the scent from the field. So if there were any predators or anything in there, I would be able to know right away without actually exposing myself because I have this tiny little corner that I could hide in. I used that assumption to pick the spot where I wanted to hunt. My hope was that I would be able to find a tree right on that edge, hit that tree line, and get in the saddle. Now, I am making a lot of assumptions with this plan. In the scouting trip, I only scouted here one time. The deer were already out feeding in the soybeans. I did not see where they were going to bedding. I didn't have time before the season to go back into this place and actually look for bedding or hot sign. So I was making a bunch of assumptions that they were bedding in that area and that they would be coming out into the field from that spot. This also meant that I did not have a tree picked out because when I did the scouting, I wasn't sure I was going to actually hunt this place. So I had no tree picked out, just a rough idea about where I wanted to go. When opening day came, I decided not to hunt in the morning. Because I only scouted this spot once, I didn't have a tree picked out. I didn't have the confidence that I could go into that spot, find a suitable tree, and set myself up for success in the morning. In general, I've never done that style of hunting. I have always set my trees up beforehand and left my hang on there so I could just go and just climb up. Because I'm using the saddle and I'm trying to be more mobile, that wasn't an option. Instead, I took my wife out for a nice breakfast, and then I went out very early to hunt the afternoon. I parked at the trailhead around 3 p.m., and it's not even really a trailhead. I don't know how to describe it, but I thought I was very early. Sunset was at like 6:40 or so. So, I had a solid 3 hours, almost 3.5 hours, maybe even more, to hunt, to get set up and hunt. But there were already 2 trucks there, which definitely deflated me. But this is public land. This is public land hunting. Every time I went out in Texas, there were trucks there. I had never had that place by myself. So I pressed on, went in anyway, and I just did so very carefully. I walked a little bit slower than I would have on the main trail, and I was paying attention not only for animals, but people. I don't want to be the guy that blows someone else's hunt, so I'm trying to pay attention, looking up into the trees to see, is there someone there already, making sure that I'm not trying to go to the same spot that someone is already at. As I made my way in, I didn't see anybody. But as I was approaching that tree line, I could see into the soybean field that I wanted to hunt. And I could see there were already 3 deer in that field. 1 doe and, it looked like 3 does. I'm pretty sure it was 1 doe and 2 relatively mature fawns. No spots or anything. They look almost the same size as her, but clearly a little bit younger. They were about 300 yards away, and they had no idea I was there. I had good wind, so I slowed down even more and had to be calculated with my approach so that I could get into the tree line. I worked my way in differently than I had planned, but that's how hunting goes, and I tried to find a tree to get set up in. This brings us to lesson number 4. Practice how you hunt. To my disappointment, I got into the tree line and was essentially walking up and down the tree line, and there was only one tree that I could get into, just one. There were way too many junipers, and everything was very thick, dense. It was hard to move around, and there was one lonely little tree that I could climb up. It was a pine tree. I used my saddle, climbed up as high as I could get, and disappointment came yet again. I had one shooting lane, and that shooting lane was not realistic for a bow hunt. Maybe for a muzzleloader hunt if I was using like my hang-on stand or something, but that one opening would have set me up for an 80-yard shot, which I was not about to take. This spot that I was in would be perfect for an observation sit. I could easily see the vast majority of this field. I could also see the field behind me that I had just went past to get to this one. But I wanted to set myself up to kill, not to observe. So I made the decision, we're going to hunt from the ground. So I decided to get down. Now you might be saying, Andrew, this is lesson number 4, practice how you hunt. What does this have to do with that? Well, I'll tell you. In the years that I have spent hunting, I've learned that things never go as planned. You have to practice hunting in a variety of different situations so that you can adapt to the situation to try and find success. If you try and bend the situation to your will, you often will leave empty-handed. I feel that a lot of people hunt the same stands in the same way they always have, and that is why they have the same success that they always have. For some people on private land, that might be great, but if you're hunting on public land, you have to be very adaptable, be willing to move, relocate, and do what you need to do to get to a spot to kill deer. Now, I only gave myself 1 month to practice, but the way I practiced set me up for this. I shot my bow every single day at different angles and different positions at different yardages. I shot out of my saddle in a tree, standing, kneeling, weak side, strong side. I tried to put myself in all of these different positions so that if I needed to use a weird tree or hunt from the ground, I wouldn't have any issues with that. I also climbed up and down the tree in my yard that I was shooting at every single time I wanted to shoot out of the tree. So I had a lot of experience getting set up and down very quickly and quietly. Because I had built up that confidence in my gear leading up to the season, even though I only was shooting for about a month, I was very confident in my setup, the way I packed everything, how everything was supposed to go. So I had zero hesitation getting down from the tree, get set up on the ground, and in a few minutes, I was on the ground, everything packed up, with a spot ready to hunt the evening. I found an opening in the junipers that gave me a shooting lane sitting down, but also if I needed to, depending on the angle if deer came, I could back up and stand and shift slightly to my right so that I would have a different shooting lane and opportunity. All with decent concealment from the junipers, and I added a little bit extra natural cover to conceal any movement that I needed to make. Now at this time, I worked myself into the tree line. That doe and her fawns were already gone. I don't think I spooked them in any way. They were feeding across the field, going from the east side to the west side as I approached, and I think they just fed their way out. I settled into my spot, sat down, and tried to sit as still as possible, waiting for the sun to go down and hoping that that would bring in a rush of activity. I generally don't like to hunt from the ground too much because your movements are amplified, in my opinion. You're at the same level as the deer. Fortunately, this particular spot, I could see everything. I could see the entire field, so I didn't have limited visibility, which sometimes is an issue. But I know that my movements are amplified and I need to be extra cautious. As the day wore on and I was getting closer and closer to sunset, probably that last hour, I saw what looked like a deer pop out on the opposite side of the field. It was roughly 250 yards. Originally, when I saw those does, I wasn't yet in the tree line. So I ranged, and as I ranged, I saw that it was a little buck. It was a little fork buck, and he was about 250 yards away. I wanted to get a better look, so I put the rangefinder down, picked up my binos, glassed him, and I confirmed, yes, this is a 4-point buck. In the short amount of time from putting my binos in my harness to picking up my phone to mark where he was on onX, I look up and he is bolting back into the trees, like running back into the trees. And I thought, damn, I bet someone just shot that buck. But based on how the rest of that night went, I'm pretty sure that he just picked up the scent of another hunter that was further down than I was. My excitement was definitely growing at this point, though. I had seen 1 buck, 3 does, 4 deer total. This was a pretty good day. As far as I'm concerned, this was a win considering I'd only been in this spot once before. I didn't give it too much weight and pressure. And if nothing else happened, I would have been pretty okay. But then there's 30 minutes of light left. And as they do, I'm looking around and all of a sudden there's a buck right in front of me. Now, not right in front of me, but he was in that little jut out that I was talking about that I thought that deer would want to come out so that they could get the wind and hit the edge of the soybeans before exposing themselves in the entire field. So this buck is a small 6-point, much bigger than that 4-point that I saw, and he was as wide as his ears, so by Texas standards, he was legal. That's not a requirement here, but just my point of comparison. And right behind him, as he's working in, another buck comes out. And then that one works out, and another buck comes out. And there are 3 deer in this field. The third one is the biggest of the group so far. The second one is the smallest. And my heart is just pounding through my chest. I'm like, oh, this is great. There's a big bachelor group. And in my mind, I'm thinking, usually with bachelor groups, the biggest bucks are in the back. Now there are 3, and this could just be a group of 3, but there could be more. But either way, I'm like, I need to start ranging. I need to figure out where these guys are. Are they in my shooting lane? Or they're in my shooting lane, but can I shoot them? So I'm ranging this lead buck, and I'm ranging him at 70 yards. And I keep clicking this thing because there's some tall grass, and I'm thinking, oh, maybe I'm hitting the grass behind him. Maybe I'm not getting him. But sure enough, I'm consistently getting 70 yards. In that time that I was ranging, I put my rangefinder down. There are 2 more bucks behind him, and they are absolute shooter bucks. The 4th one in particular is the biggest buck that I've ever seen with a tag in my pocket. Now, I've seen some huge deer on private land in Texas, but I could never hunt those deer. This time, though, he was a great sized deer. Now, I am not a great judge of antler size. I'll just be upfront with that. But the biggest buck I've ever shot, it was 125 inches. I shot him in South Texas. And this buck number 4, is obviously bigger than that buck, without any question. So I don't know what he was, but bigger than 125. I was just out of my mind. I keep ranging and ranging and ranging and ranging, but nothing could change the fact that the deer are too far. The closest the group ever got was 65 yards. I've been shooting at 60 yards, but that's as far as I can shoot with my current setup. My sight doesn't go any further. And that bachelor group went on to live another day. But damn, that was an exciting, exciting hunt. I managed to hunt the spot one more time on opening weekend. This time, I went in earlier, tried to get closer to that bedding. The wind was going to be in the same direction, so that south-southeast wind, which is actually not common. Every time I check, the wind is like northeast wind, so kind of the exact opposite of the way this wind was going. I went in, pushed as close to the area that they popped out as possible. I climbed up and down 3 different trees, and none of them presented shooting lanes that I could use. If the deer were going to pop out in the same area, use the same trail, there was no way I was going to make it happen from one of those trees. So I ended up on the ground again. I found a different spot with another opening in the junipers. This one was a little bit more exposed, but I cut some limbs and found some dead limbs and set them up in front of me to hide any movement. I'm hunting from the ground again and just trying to sit and wait and see what happens. And sure enough, as the day goes on, that doe pops out with her 2 fawns. They feed their way across the field. I think they're probably about 150, 200 yards or so from me at this point. And I love seeing deer, so just watching them go across the field was totally fine with me. That fork buck never popped out again. I was looking for him, thinking that, all right, if the does pop out and the fork buck pops out, these other bucks are definitely going to pop out. So he never showed, but then right before sunset, a buck pops out from the exact same spot. I ranged him at 55 yards. He's feeding towards me into the soybeans. Then a second buck pops out. Then a third buck pops out. If the pattern held from last time, the next buck was going to be the big shooter buck that I wanted to target. But then, as it goes, all of a sudden, the wind swirls and shifts. And the next thing I know, I see that lead buck's nose go up, look right at me, stomp his hoof, turn around and take the whole group with him. That fourth buck never showed up. You could be in the perfect setup, the perfect everything with a perfect wind. You tried to play it the best you can, but the wind is above all. If the wind shifts and swirls and changes, your hunt can go with it, especially if you're hunting from the ground. If you can't play the wind, you're going to have a hard time finding success. I'm not a huge believer in the scent products. I've seen videos on YouTube where people test dogs on those scent hiding products and they don't ever seem to really work. Maybe if I used something, it could have helped me in this case, but I think that the wind is the wind and it's going to carry your human scent. And even if you try and hide it or block it or throw a cover scent on it, your scent is still in there and they're going to pick it up and they're going to move on. That was the end of my opening weekend. That was my final chance at finding opening weekend success. I have never had opening day success, for the record. So one day I'll get there, I'm sure. But damn, I had a good time. That was undoubtedly, even just the first day, was the best opening day of hunting I've ever had, ever. Which brings me to the final lesson, lesson number 5. Where you hunt matters. I think this one might be a little controversial because there's only so much that you can do with it. I've had the luxury of hunting in several different states and living in several different states and being exposed to what hunting is like in those different areas. All the other lessons are going to help you prioritize your efforts, finding the spot in the spot, knowing that you're setting yourself up with the right wind for the right hunt in the right way so that you can execute. But when I say where you hunt matters, I'm talking the unit, the state, the spot. Opening day alone in Tennessee, one day, one evening, I saw more deer than in 2 years of hunting public land in Texas combined. When I hunted public land in Texas, I was lucky if I saw a deer. Now, I know that the state of Texas is huge. Perhaps public land in other parts of the state, you see more deer. But within an hour and a half of me, there was one walk-in access spot. And that was the spot I hunted. And I hunted all over that place. And I never saw more than 1 or 2 deer at most hunting in a day. And the ones I did see were not legal. It was either does outside of doe season or bucks that weren't as wide as their ears, so they probably weren't 14 inches. I could hunt as hard as I wanted, but there weren't that many deer, which is something you can't control. Similarly, I could have hunted that timber spot that I thought was great, where I got 3 miles away from the road and that there weren't anybody else out there, but I wasn't seeing the deer. I guess the point in this last lesson is you've got to be willing to try different spots, possibly different states if necessary. I know that I am lucky in the sense that I've moved from place to place, and it's not realistic for people to just get up and relocate to hunt deer. If you're hunting deer in a spot, you're seeing the quality and type of deer that you're happy with, then you don't have to change that. I'm not saying you need to change. But if you're not seeing the deer that you think you should be, and you've been hunting the same piece of public forever, it might be time for you to consider getting up, picking a new spot, and trying something else. Drive a little further if you can. If you're like me and you have a few options to hunt, instead of going to the spot that's 10 to 15 or 20 minutes from your house, drive 30 or 45, or maybe even an hour. See if the deer sign is better. Maybe throw some cameras out there, leave them all season, and then collect them in the spring and see if there's better opportunities for you. The reality is, deer aren't always going to be in the spot that are closest to us. You have to hunt the deer where they are. Not every spot on a map that looks like it's going to hold a boatload of deer is going to have a boatload of deer. You have to be willing to hunt where the deer are and put yourself in a place that is going to set you up for killing success. All right, that is it for my Tennessee opener. Those are my 5 lessons for you. To recap, lesson number 1, scouting is essential. Lesson number 2, cameras are for inventory only. Lesson number 3, play the wind. Lesson number 4, practice how you hunt. And lesson number 5, where you hunt matters. You have to be willing to go where the deer are and set yourself up for success. I hope you're getting out there and hunting. I am not going to be hunting the next couple of weekends. I'm actually going to be traveling a bit. Got to go see some friends and family, which is going to be exciting. But I'm excited to hunt hard once I get back. It'll be muzzleloader season very soon here in Tennessee. Looking forward to that. I really hope that you're having a good start to your season if you've already been out there hunting. If you're not hunting yet, I hope that when you do, your season starts off really well and you have an awesome opening weekend. What lessons would you add to my list? Let me know in the comments if you're watching this on YouTube, or shoot me a DM or a comment on Instagram at EndurHunt. I'm at EndurHunt. I'd love to see a DM from you. And I just want to say thank you for listening. Good luck this season. Time is our most valuable asset, and I don't take it for granted that you chose to spend it with me. I hope that this podcast was valuable to you. I hope that maybe it reminded you of some things or taught you some new lessons, that it'll help you be more prepared as you go into your season. Thank you, and I'll see y'all next time.